The alarm did not build up slowly. It hit the station all at once, like a hammer on glass. 1 second I was restocking bandages in the medbay, and the next second every light on Deck 5 turned red, and a voice I had never heard before came out of the ceiling. It was the station's computer, but it did not sound polite anymore. All the soft manners had been stripped out of it. It said 7 words that froze 200 different hearts at the same time. Containment failure in Lab Theta. Classification 9. My name is Daniel Brooks. I am a medic, and at that moment I was the only human being on a research station called the Veil of Serenity, floating in deep space with 11 alien species who all believed, very politely, that I was the most fragile creature on board. They had a hazard scale for dangerous materials. Class 1 meant a mild rash. Class 4 meant sealed suits. Class 7 meant evacuate the deck. Class 9 was not supposed to be real. Class 9 was the theoretical category, the one written at the bottom of the chart almost as a joke. It meant a pathogen capable of ending an entire species. It meant extinction in a bottle. And now the ceiling was telling me one of those was loose 3 decks below my feet. I dropped the bandages and ran. I want to be honest with you because this is my story and I have promised myself to tell it straight. I did not run because I was brave. I ran because I am a medic, and when an alarm sounds, my legs move before my brain has finished voting on the matter. Some old instructor drilled that into me years ago on Earth, a gray-haired man named Henry Cole who used to say that fear is just information, and information never excused anyone from doing their job. The corridor outside the medbay was chaos. The Vrelka, the crystal people, were doing the thing they do when they panic. Their bodies were folding inward, sealing themselves inside their own glassy shells, right there in the middle of the hallway, turning into smooth, silent boulders that nobody could move. 3 of them blocked the main junction like fallen statues. The Osui, the bird people, were worse. Osui panic spreads through a flock like fire through dry grass, because they feel each other's emotions directly. 100 of them were stampeding toward the escape pods in a single screaming wave of feathers and thin legs, and they were trampling anyone too slow to keep up. I saw a young Osui go down under the crowd near the transit shaft. I pulled her out by one wing, checked her airway in 4 seconds flat, felt the flutter of her double heartbeat under my thumb, and shoved her into an alcove where the flock could not crush her. She stared at me with huge orange eyes and said something I will never forget. She said, "Why are you going the wrong way?" "Because that is the job," I told her, and I kept moving. Here is what you need to understand about the Concord, the great alliance of species that runs this part of the galaxy. They are older than us. They are smarter than us in 1,000 ways. Their ships are beautiful, and their cities are peaceful, and their science makes ours look like children stacking blocks. But every single one of their species evolved on gentle worlds. Clean water, mild weather, almost no disease. When they discovered Earth, and learned that humans grew up on a planet full of plagues and parasites and venom, they did not admire us. They pitied us. They called Earth a hardship world. They let exactly 1 human serve on this station, mostly as a diplomatic favor, and they gave him the medbay because they figured he could not break anything important in there. That human was me, and the funny thing, the thing that was about to matter more than anything else in my life, was a detail buried in my enlistment file that none of them had ever bothered to read. Every human who serves in deep space gets the PanVac series before launch. 41 injections over 6 months. Broad-spectrum protection built from a century of surviving our own worst outbreaks. Updated every year, designed to give a human immune system a head start against threats nobody has even discovered yet. The Concord refused to approve it for their own people. They called it reckless. They called it self-experimentation. Their doctrine was simple. Never fight a disease. Avoid it, seal it, or burn it. I was thinking about that word burn when the ceiling spoke again. The computer announced that Class 9 protocol was now active. In accordance with Concord emergency law, Decks 4 through 7 would undergo full sterilization burn in 6 minutes. Plasma flooding of every corridor and every room. Anything organic on those decks would be reduced to clean white ash. Then the computer said the part that turned my blood to ice water. 213 crew members were still inside the burn zone. The lifts had locked. The blast doors had dropped. 6 minutes was not enough time to get them out, and the station was not going to try. The math had been done by a machine, and the machine had decided that 213 lives were an acceptable price to keep a Class 9 off the galactic map. Then the computer said one more thing, quietly, almost gently. It said, "May your lineages forgive us." My communicator buzzed against my wrist. It was Tessic. Tessic is an Osui, a junior researcher in the deep containment labs, small even for his kind, nervous around blood, terrified of loud noises, and somehow the closest friend I had made in 2 years on this station. His voice came through cracked and shaking. "Daniel," he said, "I am in the antechamber outside Lab Theta. The door's sealed. I can see it through the window. The sample cylinder is cracked, and the material is coming out, and the machines cannot touch it. Daniel, I am inside the burn zone." I looked at the emergency ladder shaft in front of me. Deck 5 to Deck 7. Lab Theta. The exact center of the danger. Every instinct that keeps a creature alive told me to climb up, not down. I climbed down. I am not going to pretend my hands were steady on those rungs. They were not. But my old instructor was right about fear being information, and the information was simple. In 5 minutes, plasma was going to erase Tessic and 212 other people, and the only reason it had to happen was a cracked cylinder that nothing on this station was rated to touch. That was the whole problem. One object, 1 meter of distance between it and a sealed crash container. The grandest civilization in the galaxy was about to burn its own people because nobody could cross 1 meter. I hit the Deck 7 corridor running. The lights down there were dark red, and the air tasted of the sharp chemical washed the station releases before a burn. Warning strips pulsed along the floor, all pointing away from Lab Theta, and I followed them backward like a salmon swimming up a river. 2 Vrelka guards were sealed into their shells outside the lab section, frozen mid-retreat. I ran past them and reached the antechamber, and there was Tessic, pressed flat against the wall, feathers standing straight out from his body, staring through the observation window into the lab. I looked through the glass, and for the first time in my life, I saw a Class 9. The sample cylinder stood in its cradle in the center of the lab, and there was a crack running up its side like black lightning. Out of that crack, something was crawling. It looked like a film of oil, thin and dark, with colors moving inside it that my eyes did not want to follow. It was not flowing like a liquid. It was climbing. It had already covered half the cylinder, and it was reaching, actually reaching, toward the air vent above the cradle. The lab's robotic arms hung dead around it. Tessic told me in a rush that the material had ruined them on contact, ruined the sealant foam, ruined the containment field emitters, ruined everything the station had thrown at it. It had come from a dead precursor world, dug out of the ruins of a species that no longer existed, and now I understood exactly what had happened to that species. The ceiling said 4 minutes. The inner door was not fully sealed. The failure that cracked the cylinder had jammed the lock at a finger's width of open space. I could get in. Tessic grabbed my sleeve with his thin claws and begged me not to, and I looked at the crash kit mounted on the antechamber wall, a cryogenic emergency container rated for hot biological material, and I did the math the machine upstairs had refused to do. 1 meter, 1 object, 1 pair of hands. I pulled the crash kit off the wall, forced the inner door, and stepped into the lab with a Class 9. The air inside felt heavy, though that was probably my imagination. I set the open crash kit on the floor beside the cradle. The dark film had noticed me. I know how that sounds, but I am telling you what I saw. The reaching edge of it turned, the way a plant turns toward light. I raised my gloved hand toward the cylinder, and then I stopped, because a memory surfaced from my first board week on this station, when I had read the entire equipment manifest just to pass the time. Concord glove polymer is reactive. It is chemically active on its surface, which is exactly what this material had used to destroy the robotic arms, the foam, and the seals. Everything it had beaten was synthetic. Everything it had beaten was, in some small way, alive with chemistry. Human skin, dead keratin on the outside, plain and simple and stubborn, was not on that list. The ceiling said 3 minutes. Tessic was screaming my name through the glass. I stripped off my glove, and with my bare right hand, I seized the cracked cylinder of the deadliest substance in the known galaxy. It was cold. That is what I remember most. Cold and faintly rough, like wet stone. The dark film flowed over my fingers the moment I touched it, and I felt a sting sink into my palm like a needle made of ice. I did not stop. I lifted the cylinder out of its cradle, laid it into the crash kit, folded the reaching film in after it with the edge of my bare hand, and slammed the lid. The seals fired. The cryogenic system roared. The indicator on the lid cycled from red to amber to a steady, beautiful green. The ceiling stopped counting at 19 seconds. I stood up, swaying a little, and looked at Tessic through the window. His beak was open. His whole body was trembling. He pointed one shaking claw at my bare hand, at the faint gray shimmer already fading into my skin, and he whispered that I had touched it, that I was dead, that no living thing survives contact with a Class 9. I held up my palm so he could see it, and I gave him the only thing I had left, which was a steady voice and half a smile. "Relax," I told him. "I got the vaccine." And then my medical band vibrated against my wrist, quietly, so only I could feel it. I glanced down at the small screen while Tessic sobbed with relief on the other side of the glass. The band had already sampled my blood through the skin. It had already compared what it found against my Panvax record. The words on the screen were small and white, and they were only for me. Panvax coverage, partial match, 61%. Prognosis unknown. I closed my hand over the screen, looked up at my friend, and kept smiling. They built my prison in 40 minutes, and it was the most polite prison in the galaxy. A transparent isolation bubble in the center of Medical Bay. 2-3 layers of sealed material, its own air supply, its own power. A small bed, a small table, and a delivery hatch that ran everything through a sterilizing field, hot enough to melt steel. By the time the seals finished hissing shut around me, the veil of serenity had gone from a quiet research station to the most watched point in Concord space. Every ship within a light year had turned toward us. Every government had been woken up. A human had touched a Class 9 with his bare hand, and 1 hour later, that human was still breathing. According to every model the Concord had ever built, that was impossible. Their projections gave any living organism between 4 and 11 minutes after direct contact. I was sitting on my little bed eating ration crackers, and I could see the disbelief on the other side of the barrier growing thicker by the minute. Hazmat teams from 7 different species stood in a wide circle around my bubble, sealed inside armored suits, holding instruments pointed at me the way soldiers hold weapons. Nobody spoke. They just watched me chew. I kept eating the crackers. I want to be honest about the crackers, because they matter later. I was not eating because I was calm. I was eating because when I am frightened, truly frightened, my hands need something to do, and my body demands fuel, and crackers are the only thing that ever quiets the shaking in my chest. Nobody watching knew that. To them, the human was relaxed. The human was casual. The human had grabbed extinction with one hand and was now having a snack. I understand that a legend was being born on the other side of that barrier, and the legend was built on a lie of body language. That is fine. Most legends are. 2 hours in, the sting in my palm had grown into a warm ache that reached my elbow. I did not mention it to anyone yet. The interrogation came at hour 3, though they called it a consultation. A screen unfolded outside my bubble, taller than I was, and the faces of the Concord Health Directorate appeared on it. 11 senior officials of 11 species, arranged in a solemn grid. The chair of the session was a Vrelka elder named Counselor Silic, whose crystal body was so old it had gone cloudy, like sea glass. Silic's voice came through flat and cold, and the first question was not about my health. The first question was, what did you inject into your body before this mission, and who authorized it? So I told them. I told them about the Panvax series, all 41 doses, the long needles and the sore shoulders, and the 6 months of preparation every deep space human goes through. I told them it was built from 100 years of human outbreaks, from every plague we had beaten on our crowded, difficult world, layered together and updated every year by people who assume the universe is trying to kill us, because on Earth, it usually is. I told them every human in deep space carries this protection. Thousands of us. It has been standard practice for decades. The grid of faces went very still. Then it erupted. I watched 11 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy talk over each other for the first time, in what I suspect was centuries. Words came through the translator in fragments. Reckless, unlicensed. Self-experimentation on an entire species. A directorate official with a face like folded silver said that deliberately training an immune system was like keeping a fire burning in your own house to prepare for arson. And Counselor Silix silenced them all with one raised crystal hand and asked me the only question that actually mattered. Did your vaccine cover this pathogen? I looked at that wall of ancient, brilliant, frightened faces. My medical band sat against my wrist with its little secret. 61%. A partial match. Enough to slow the thing in my blood, not enough to stop it. And I made a decision that I still think about, because it shaped everything that came after. I did not lie to them. I just chose my words like a man crossing a river on wet stones. I said, my immune system recognized it on contact. It is mounting a response right now. Ask your instruments, not me. Their instruments confirmed it, and the room changed. The pathogen in my bloodstream, the same material that had dissolved robotic arms and eaten containment foam, was being met. Something in my blood was fighting it, not beating it, fighting it. The distinction was lost on them, and for the moment, I let it stay lost. The fever arrived at hour 9, and it did not knock first. 1 minute I was answering questions about human medical history, and the next minute the light in the room turned syrupy and slow, and sweat broke out across my back, and my joints began to ache like rusted hinges being forced open. My medical band drew a soft line upward on its display and kept drawing. The hazmat circle outside pressed closer to the barrier. I heard someone report that the human's core temperature had passed a threshold that would cause organ failure in 4 of the 11 Concord species. For us, it was a Tuesday. I told them that. I told them fever is not the disease. Fever is the weapon. My body was deliberately turning itself into a furnace because the pathogen liked things cool and calm, and my immune system had decided it was going to get neither. They wrote that down like students. The most advanced civilization in history, taking notes on a sweating medic, because in all their millions of years, none of them had ever stood inside a burning body and fought. That is the part I truly could not get over, and I had time in that bubble to think about it. The Concord had no doctrine for treatment, none. Their entire medical science was built on 3 walls: avoid, seal, burn. Their species evolved on such gentle worlds that infection was never a war to be won, only a fire to be fled. They had no antibiotics, because they never needed them. No antivirals. No transfusions. No concept of nursing a patient through a battle, because for them, there had never been a battle. There was only clean, or lost. So they stood around my bubble with technology that could fold space, and not one of them could do anything for me except watch the numbers climb. Tessic came at hour 14, when the medbay had emptied for the night cycle and only 2 guards remained. He walked past the hazmat line in a simple lab suit, ignoring the guards completely, dragged a stool to the edge of my bubble, and sat down with his feathers puffed out the way Osui do when they are pretending to be bigger than their fear. He looked at my face, and then at my right arm, and his eyes stopped there. I looked down too. Under the skin of my forearm, faint dark lines had appeared, rising up from my palm like the roots of a thin gray plant. They had not been there an hour before. "You told me you had the vaccine," Tessic said quietly. And because he was my friend, And because he had watched me walk into that lab, I gave him the truth I had hidden from the directorate. I held up my band and showed him the number. 61%, I said. That is not a vaccine, Tessic. That is a head start. My body recognized about 2/3 of this thing on contact. The last third, it is meeting for the first time, and it is learning as fast as it can. This is going to be a race. I am not going to pretend to you that I know who wins it. He was silent for a long moment. Osui do not cry, but their throat feathers ripple when they grieve, and his were rippling. Then he asked me why. Why say the line? Why smile? Why let the whole station believe I had walked in protected? Because of you, I told him. Because 213 people were about to be ash, and afterward, every one of them needed to believe the danger was handled, or the panic would have done what the burn did not. A medic's first tool is not medicine, Tessic. It is calm. You hand it out first, and you hand it out free, and you absolutely never let the patient see that your own supply is running low. He pressed one thin claw flat against the barrier. I pressed my burning palm against the other side, the same palm that had held the cylinder. We stayed like that for a while, a bird and a furnace, separated by 3 layers of transparent wall. At hour 20, Earth called. The Concorde patched the signal into my bubble, and the face of Dr. Ellen Marsh filled the screen, Chief of Off-World Medical Command, a sharp gray-eyed woman I had met exactly once at a briefing years ago. She did not waste a second on comfort. She pulled up my live readings, studied them the way a general studies a map, and said, "Brooks, listen to me. Your counts show a real response building on the 61% foundation. Your body is drafting new defenses against the unmatched portion right now. That process takes days. Your job is to survive the gap. Hydrate past the point of reason. Eat even when it disgusts you. Sleep in pieces if you have to. Fever is your ally until it is not, and your band will tell you when it is not." Then her voice dropped, and she said the thing that told me exactly how serious this was. She said, "One more thing. Everything your body does in the next week, every cell it builds, every trick it learns, will be the first data of its kind in galactic history. If you get through this, what is in your veins may be worth more than every ship Earth has ever built. And if you do not get through it, Daniel, the data survives you, and it will save whoever comes next. Either way, you are already the most important patient our species has ever had. No pressure." I actually laughed, which turned into a cough, which turned into a long look at the gray lines on my arm. They had reached my elbow. It was hour 26 when I called the directorate back myself. The fever had me swaying. My palm felt like it was gripping hot coals, and my thoughts had taken on that loose, floating quality that tells a medic his own dashboard is starting to flicker. But there was one thing I needed to say while I could still say it clearly, and I made them wake Counselor Silic to hear it. "Stop trying to save me," I told the old crystal face on the screen. "You do not know how, and honestly, that is fine. That was never going to be your part in this. I need you to do something you are actually built for. I need you to observe. Put every scanner this station owns on this bubble. Record my blood at the deepest resolution you have. Map every move my immune system makes, and every counter move this thing invents. You have never watched anything fight back before. In your entire history, you have never once seen a living body go to war and refuse to lose. So take notes, because win or lose, one of us in this bubble is the most valuable experiment in the galaxy, and I would rather it be me than the thing in my hand." Silic looked at me for a long, silent moment, and then the old counselor did something I had never seen Avrelka do. Silic bowed. The whole cloudy crystal body bent forward on the screen, and the translator rendered the reply in a single soft sentence. "It will be done, and it will be witnessed." The screen went dark, and I lay back on the little bed, and that is when the first bad night began. The dark lines crossed my elbow and started up toward my shoulder. My temperature climbed past the last number Marsh had circled in green. Somewhere after midnight, station time, my legs stopped answering properly, and the room tilted, and I went down on the floor of the bubble with my heart hammering out a rhythm no drummer would claim. The last thing I heard before the dark pulled me under was not an alarm, though the alarms were certainly singing. It was a guard outside the barrier, reading an incoming transmission to the room in a shaking voice. A Concorde warship, the Lance of Accord, had broken from patrol and was burning hard toward our station at maximum speed. Its commander, a High Warden named Krellin, had sent one line ahead of the ship, and the line was this: "If the human's body becomes the pathogen's victory, I will finish what the burn did not." Then the floor of the bubble came up to meet me, and everything went quiet. I woke up on the floor of the bubble with a machine breathing for me. They had sent in automated arms through the sterile hatch while I was unconscious, and the arms had lifted me, placed lines into my veins, and fitted a soft mask over my face. The ceiling above me was full of new instruments, scanner heads glowing faintly blue, all of them aimed down at my body like an audience leaning in. Silic had kept the promise. Every machine the station owned was watching me, and what they were watching, I found out later, changed Concorde science forever. But from the inside, it did not feel like history. From the inside, it felt like drowning in warm sand. Let me try to describe the second day the way I lived it, because the recordings show what my blood did, but they do not show what it cost. The fever settled in at a level that made time behave strangely. Minutes stretched into gray hallways. Hours collapsed into single heartbeats. I would blink and the light cycle outside the bubble had changed. I would blink again and Tessic was there, then gone, then there again. My band spoke to me in small vibrations, reminding me to drink, and I obeyed it like a soldier obeying orders from a commander he can no longer see, because Marsh had told me survival lived inside those small obediences, and I believed her. Through it all, I could feel the war. People ask me now what it felt like, and I have settled on this answer. It felt like being a country, not a body, a country. Somewhere in my chest, factories were running day and night, and I felt their heat. Along my arm, where the dark lines climbed, there was a front line, and it moved, and I swear I could feel it move, a deep itching pressure that crawled a little higher when the enemy advanced and sank a little lower when my side pushed back. My spine ached the way I imagine roads ache under the weight of convoys. And behind it all, some quiet command post kept making decisions without asking me, spending resources, choosing what to defend and what to surrender, running the oldest and most ruthless kind of war there is, the kind fought inside a single skin. The scientists outside the bubble were seeing the same war through their scanners, and I am told the observation gallery was never empty again after the second day. They watched my immune system do things their textbooks said were myths. They watched it take apart pieces of the pathogen and hold the fragments up like captured maps, teaching itself the enemy's shape. They watched it build a response, test it, fail, tear the failure down, and build again, faster, over and over, generation after generation of defenders, each one slightly better than the last. One of the Vrelka researchers later told me that the gallery went completely silent the first time they understood what they were seeing. Your body was not reacting, she said. Your body was designing. It was running experiments on itself at a speed our best laboratories cannot match. We watched a factory learn. The problem was that the enemy could learn too. This was no ordinary pathogen, and by the third day, everyone knew it. The material from the precursor world was not a simple organism. It was engineered, ancient and deliberate, a weapon built by hands that had turned to dust ages ago, and it carried its own answers. Each time my blood cracked one version of it, the thing shifted, rewrote its surface, and came back wearing a new face. The scanners caught the whole grim exchange, move and counter-move, like a chess game played at a million boards at once. My fever would break for an hour, and hope would ripple through the gallery, and then the lines on my arm would darken and advance, and the temperature would climb again, and the gallery would go quiet. On the third night, fear found its own way to breach containment, and it did not need a cracked cylinder to do it. Word had spread through the station, the way word always does, that the original sample still existed, sealed in the crash kit, locked in Lab Theta under triple guard. To the scientists, That frozen kit was priceless. To a frightened crew trapped under galactic quarantine, it was a bomb sitting in the basement, and some of them decided they were done living above it. A Vrelka logistics officer named Brelk gathered 9 others, crew from 4 different species. Quiet and reasonable people pushed past their limit, and in the middle of the night cycle they overrode a cargo lift, reached the lab theta level, and attempted to load the crash kit into a disposal pod aimed at the star. I watched it happen on the feed from my bed, too weak to stand, shouting into a communicator that nobody answered, because here is what none of them understood, and what Tessic, sprinting through the corridors in his sleeping wrap with 2 security officers behind him, understood completely. If my body won this war, the victory would mean nothing without proof, and proof would require testing my blood against the pure, original threat. Burn the sample, and even if I survived, humanity's answer to a Class 9 would die unverified. A story instead of a science, useless to the next station and the next outbreak and the next terrified crew. Brelk's people were about to throw away the cure to feel safe from the disease, and they were 9 steps from the pod bay when Tessic reached them. He did not fight them. I want to be clear about that, because the recording of what he actually did is taught now in Concord academies. Tessic, the smallest person in that corridor, walked between 10 desperate crew members and the disposal pod, spread his thin arms across the hatch, and talked. He told them what the sample was worth. He told them what my fever was buying, hour by hour, 3 decks above their heads. He told them that fear was information, which he had gotten from me, who had gotten it from an old man on Earth, and then he told them the part that was entirely his own. He said, "You are afraid of the thing in this kit, and you are right to be. But the human upstairs is teaching the galaxy how to make that fear obsolete, and this kit is the final page of the lesson. Throw it into the star, and the fear stays forever. Guard it 1 more week, and your children will need a museum to know what it was." Brelk stood motionless for a long moment, crystal body dim with exhaustion, and then the officer did the bravest thing anyone did that whole night. Brelk turned around, faced the 9 frightened people who had followed, and said, "We are relieved. Post us here instead. If the kit must exist, let it exist behind us." And that is how the Lab Theta corridor came to be guarded, for the rest of the crisis, by the same 10 crew members who had tried to destroy what it held, standing voluntary watch in double shifts, which Counselor Silic ruled was not a crime but a conversion, and which I am told did more to calm the station than any announcement the Directorate ever made. Something else happened on that 3rd night, quieter, and I did not learn of it until later. The Concord had been broadcasting the medical feed to its member worlds, and the feed had reached the human stations too, all the far scattered postings where our people serve. And from every one of them, messages began arriving, addressed to my bubble, not sympathy, volunteers, human medics, engineers, cooks, and cargo handlers, hundreds of them, every message some variation of the same sentence. I have the same 41 injections he has. If his blood is not enough, mine is available. Tell the doctor to hold the line. Help is already vaccinated. Marsh forwarded the whole stack to my terminal with a note that said, "Thought you should know what is standing behind you." I read them through the fever, one by one, until the words swam, and if the monitors recorded elevated readings that hour, it was not the pathogen's doing. And while that war burned inside me, another one was forming outside the station. The lance of Accord arrived on the 3rd day. I saw it through the medbay's long window during one of my clear spells, and even sick, even half-blind with fever, I understood that I was looking at the most serious object I had ever seen. Concord ships are usually graceful things, all curves and light. The lance was a blade, dark, narrow, and long, built in an age when the Concord still remembered fear, kept in service for the kind of task that polite civilizations do not put in writing. It parked itself 2 kilometers off our hull, aligned its bow with our station, and simply waited, the way a drawn weapon waits. High Warden Krellin requested a channel 1 hour after arrival, and the Directorate patched it through to the medbay because Krellin refused to speak anywhere the human could not hear. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to a species I had only seen in files, the Dren, tall and gray-skinned and still, with vertical eyes like cuts in slate. When Krellin spoke, the translator gave the words a low, careful weight, and I want to record here that the High Warden was never cruel. That is what made it so frightening. Every sentence was reasonable. Krellin said, "I have read the reports 3 times. A Class 9 exists inside a living body aboard this station, and that body is fighting it, and you are all watching the fight with hope in your hearts. I understand the hope. Now I will tell you what I see, because it is my role to see it. I see a pathogen that ends species being given time, warmth, food, and the finest adaptive laboratory in the galaxy, which is this human's bloodstream, in which to study a defense it has never met and learn how to break it. If the human wins, we gain everything. If the pathogen wins, it walks out of that bubble wearing his shape, and it will have already rehearsed its answer to the only immune system that ever threatened it. I cannot allow the second outcome to remain possible." Then Krellin set the terms, and the medbay went cold around me. The human had until the end of the 5th day, station time. If by that hour his own instruments could not certify that the pathogen inside him was dying, the isolation bubble, with me in it, would be ejected from the station and given to the star we orbited. If the station refused, the lance would enforce the outcome on a larger scale. Krellin did not raise a single word of it in anger. The High Warden even looked at me directly through the screen and said, "Human, if you can hear me, understand that I will mourn you honestly. You have shown my people something we did not know existed. That changes nothing about arithmetic." I raised my hand, the gray-lined one, and I asked for the channel. My voice came out rough through the mask, but it came out level, and I said the only thing I had the strength to say. "High Warden, I have been doing arithmetic my whole career. I have just one correction to offer. You are counting 2 outcomes. There are 3. The third is that I win, and you and I get to spend the rest of our long lives arguing about this conversation. Keep the channel open. I intend to collect." Krellin studied me with those slate eyes for a moment and said, "Then win, medic," and closed the channel. The 4th day nearly settled the argument in the worst way. The pathogen made its great push a little after dawn cycle. I felt it come the way coastal people say they feel, a wave drawing back before it strikes, a strange loose emptiness through my whole body, and then the front line inside me simply broke. The dark line surged across my shoulder and touched my chest, and my temperature spiked past every circled number, and the country that was my body began, for the first time, to lose. I remember the bubble filling with the sound of my own alarms. I remember the automated arms unfolding from the ceiling. I remember Tessik's face against the barrier, both claws pressed flat, his beak moving around my name. And then there is a gap in my memory, and inside that gap, according to the recordings, this is what happened. My heart stopped for 41 seconds. I have watched the footage exactly once. The gallery, packed with the finest minds of 11 species, and not one of them able to touch me. The automated arms performing compressions with mechanical patience. Tessik fighting the guards, actually fighting them. Small nervous Tessik striking at armored hazmat suits with his thin claws, screaming that someone had to go inside, that you cannot let a person die alone behind glass. And the number 41 on the medical timeline, which I note is also the number of injections in the Panvax series, a coincidence that means nothing and that I have never once been able to forget. The arms brought me back. The charge fired, my heart remembered its work, and the country inside me came back online, battered and burning but unbroken. And when I surfaced into consciousness an hour later, I learned that 2 things had changed while I was gone. The first was Tessik. They had not been able to pull him away, so a compromise had been struck that had no precedent in Concord history. Tessik had put on a sealed suit and entered the outer airlock chamber of my isolation system, the small space between the medbay and my bubble, closer to a live Class 9 than any Concord citizen had ever voluntarily stood. He had a stool in there now, and a data terminal, and he was not leaving. When I opened my eyes, He was the first thing I saw, one thin layer of barrier away, and he said, with his feathers puffed out to twice his size, "I am told humans do not permit their people to fight alone. It is a good doctrine. I am adopting it." I did not have the strength to answer. I put my hand against the inner barrier, and he matched it, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. The second change was quieter, and at first, only the machines noticed it. Deep in the flood of data pouring off my blood, a Vrelka analyst spotted a small strange thing. During the 41 seconds my heart had been still, while everything slowed and the whole country of my body stood at the edge of dark, my immune system had not paused with it. In that stillness it had finished something, completed some final design it had been assembling for 4 days through all the fever and the noise. The analyst flagged it without understanding it. A new defender, structurally unlike the previous generations, was appearing in my bloodstream in small numbers. Not many. A whisper. A rumor of a weapon. The 5th day dawned with the lance of a cord still hanging outside the window, with Krellin's deadline 11 hours away, with my body wrecked, and my voice gone, and the dark lines resting at my collarbone like a tide deciding whether to turn. And at the 6th hour of that 5th day, with 5 hours left on a warship's arithmetic, my medical band vibrated against my wrist in a pattern it had never used before. I dragged my eyes down to the little screen. Tessic saw my face change and was on his feet instantly, terminal in his claws, pulling the same feed, and I heard him make a sound that Osui only make once or twice in a lifetime, a single high clear note like a struck bell. The new defenders were multiplying. The pathogen's counter moves against them were failing. For the first time in 5 days, in one small corner of one battlefield in the country of my body, the enemy was dying faster than it could learn. The tide had turned. Now it was a race against a deadline, and the whole galaxy was watching the clock. Turning tides do not read clocks, though, and that was the problem. My blood had found the answer, but answers take time to spread through a body, and the certification Krellin demanded required proof that the pathogen was dying everywhere, not just in one hopeful corner of the data. At the pace my new defenders were multiplying, the projections put full certainty somewhere between 14 and 20 hours away. The deadline sat at 5. Biology was going to win the war and lose the appointment, and the Lance of Accord did not accept notes from a doctor. It was Tessic, sitting in that airlock in his sealed suit, who found the way through, and I want the record to show it, because history keeps trying to hand me credit that belongs to a frightened junior researcher who refused to leave. He stood up so fast he knocked over his stool, and he said, "We are measuring the wrong thing. We are waiting to prove the pathogen is dying inside you, which is slow because you are large and complicated and full of hiding places. But the original sample is still sealed in the crash kit in Lab Theta, frozen and pure. Your new defenders exist now. We can draw them out of your blood now. So we take a measure of your blood, and we introduce it to a portion of the pure sample in a sealed test rig, and we let the whole galaxy watch what happens through the finest scanners ever pointed at anything. We do not certify your recovery. We certify your weapon." The Directorate approved it in 11 minutes, which for the Concorde is roughly the speed of panic. The station's engineers built the rig in 2 hours, a transparent test chamber no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in 9 layers of containment, mounted inside Lab Theta itself, where this had all started. Automated arms drew a single small vial of my blood through the sterile hatch. I watched that little red tube travel away from my bubble on a robotic tray, and I will admit that my whole chest went tight. Everything I had bled and burned for over 5 days was riding in 10 milliliters of red. They scheduled the test for 1 hour before Krellin's deadline. Not because they enjoyed drama, but because my defender count was still climbing every hour, and every hour of waiting made the vial stronger. Marsh called it correctly from Earth, her face on my screen, tired and fierce. She said, "You get one demonstration, Brooks. Nobody gets to be almost convincing at gunpoint. Load the strongest round you have." So for 1 final hour, the whole station waited, and I lay in my bubble doing the only useful thing left, which was drinking water and building defenders and trying not to look at the dark ship outside the window. Tessic talked to me through that hour, and here is the strange gift of a deadline: we did not talk about the test at all. He told me about his hatch home on the Asui world, a city built in the crowns of silver trees. I told him about thunderstorms on Earth, how humans sit on covered porches and watch the sky tear itself open for fun, and he said that explained a great deal about my species, and I laughed until the monitors complained. Then the hour came, and every screen on the Veil of Serenity, and on the Lance of Accord, and in the chambers of 11 governments, lit up with the same feed, a small transparent chamber. On one side, a measured portion of the precursor pathogen, dark and oily and awake, released from cryogenic sleep, immediately crawling, immediately reaching, the same terrible climbing motion I had seen on the cylinder. Displayed beside it, magnified thousands of times, the view from the deep scanners. And then, into the chamber, one drop of human blood. I have heard the next 90 seconds described many ways. A Vrelka poet later called it the moment the dark learned that the universe had been keeping a secret from it. I will describe it the way I saw it, as a medic. The pathogen met the blood and attacked, because attacking was the only thing it had ever needed to know. It shifted its surface, rewrote its face, deployed every trick it had rehearsed against my body for 5 days, and nothing worked. My new defenders were not fighting it the way the earlier generations had, trading blow for blow. They had been designed in the stillness of those 41 silent seconds, and they did something better. They locked onto the one deep structure the pathogen could not change without ceasing to be itself, the load-bearing wall of its whole design, and they took it apart. On the magnified feed, the dark material did not die dramatically. It simply came undone. It unraveled into harmless gray dust, faster and faster, the crawling edge slowing, stilling, stopping. 91 seconds after the drop of blood entered the chamber, the scanners displayed a phrase that had never once appeared in a Concord laboratory record beside a Class 9 designation. No viable pathogen detected. The station did not cheer. I expected cheering. Instead, through the barrier, through the walls, I heard something stranger and better. 11 species, hundreds of scientists, all of them going quiet at once, the way people go quiet in a place of worship. Tessic was the only sound in my world. He stood in the airlock with his claws against the barrier and his forehead against his claws, and he said my name over and over, softly, like he was checking that it still had an owner. The channel to the Lance of Accord opened without anyone requesting it. High Warden Krellin filled the screen, and for a long moment the slate eyes just looked at me, at the wrecked, gray-lined, unshaved human propped up in a bubble, and I looked back, and neither of us said anything. Then Krellin reached off screen, and every weapon on that dark blade of a ship powered down at once. We watched the running lights along its hull shift from standby red to a deep, calm blue, and Krellin said, formally, "For every recording device in 2 fleets, the arithmetic has changed. The deadline is withdrawn." And then, less formally, in a lower voice, "Medic, keep the channel open. I believe I owe you an argument, and my people pay their debts." You would think that was the end. It was not even the end of the week, because within a day of that test, a new kind of trouble started, the kind that arrives in dress uniforms. My recovery, meanwhile, went faster than anyone predicted, including me. With the pathogen's core broken, the country of my body switched from war to reconstruction with an eagerness that startled the gallery all over again. The fever collapsed on the 6th day, like a storm blowing itself out. The dark line stopped at my collarbone, hesitated for a day like a tide with nowhere to go, and then began to fade, dimming from black to gray, to a faint silver shadow. On the 8th day, the lines on my forearm dried at the surface and flaked away like old paint, and underneath, the skin was new and pink and mine. My palm kept a scar, a pale spread mark shaped a little like a starburst, where I had first gripped the cylinder. The Concord physicians offered to remove it. I declined. Some receipts you keep. On the 9th day, they opened the bubble. I want to describe that properly, because I have been in and out of 1,000 doors in my life, and only one of them ever mattered like this. The seals released in sequence, top to bottom, each one with a soft sigh, and the barrier that had stood between me and every living thing for 9 days folded away into the floor. The medbay beyond it was packed, hazmat teams with their helmets off, the entire directorate on screens, Silic present in person, ancient crystal body cloudy and bright at once, and in front of them all, Tessic, out of his sealed suit, feathers smooth for the first time in 9 days. I stood up on my own, which took some doing, and I walked out of the bubble, and the first breath of shared air tasted like metal and flowers and cold water, and Tessic crossed the distance and gripped my scarred hand with both claws, skin to skin, in front of the whole watching Concord. For a species with no history of infection, with avoidance written into their oldest laws, that grip was not a greeting, it was a doctrine changing in public. The dress uniforms arrived that afternoon. A Concord admiral of the Silver Fleet, a tall, folded-faced official named Admiral Voss, requested a private meeting, sat across a table from me while I ate my first real meal in 9 days, and slid a document into the space between us with the weight of someone moving a mountain by centimeters. The Concord, Voss explained, wished to discuss terms. The antibodies in my blood were the template for the first true counteragent to a Class 9 in galactic history. Production had already begun from my donated samples, but templates age, and threats evolve, and the deep ruins of the precursor worlds held who knew how many more sealed horrors waiting for some unlucky survey team. What the Concord required was not a vial, it was a capability. And so, with the full authorization of 11 governments, Admiral Voss had been sent to ask whether humanity would consider licensing the service of Staff Medic Daniel Brooks. I read the document twice. It was generous to the point of embarrassment. Then I pushed it back across the table, and before the Admiral's face could finish falling, I told Voss what I had been thinking about for 3 days, in that bubble with nothing to do but think. "You do not need one human," I said. "One human is a miracle, and miracles make terrible infrastructure. What you need is what stood behind me the whole time. You need the doctrine. Thousands of vaccinated humans are already serving in deep space, every one of them carrying the same head start I carried, every one of them raised by a world that taught us to stand inside a burning body and work the problem. And you have something we have never had, scanners that can watch a living immune system fight at full resolution, laboratories that can turn one survivor's blood into 1 billion doses. Separately, we are a miracle and a mirror. Together, we are a fire department. So here is my counter-offer. We build a joint core, human medics, Concord science, mixed teams, standing ready, so that the next time a Class 9 wakes up somewhere in this galaxy, nobody has to count to 6 minutes and burn their own people. And I will lead the first team on one condition, which is not negotiable. I choose my partner. Across the room, a small Osui researcher looked up from a terminal with his throat feathers rippling, and Admiral Voss followed my eyes, and understood, and signed. They gave the Corps a long official name that nobody has ever used twice. From the first week, everyone on the station simply called it the Response. Recruitment notices went out to every human posting in Concord space, and the replies came back so fast that Marsh called me from Earth laughing, actually laughing, saying she had veteran medics threatening to retire and re-enlist just to qualify. Training space was cleared on Deck 2. Concord engineers began building equipment that had never existed before. Treatment rigs, mobile containment, transfusion systems for 11 kinds of blood, an entire toolbox for a kind of medicine their civilization had never practiced. And I stood in the middle of it with a starburst scar on my palm, eating crackers when nobody was watching, and waited for the first alarm. I did not have to wait long. The first alarm of the response came 22 days after I walked out of the bubble, and the galaxy has a sense of humor, because it came from the lance of a cord. It was the middle of the night cycle. My new quarters had a real bed, and I was in it, and then my band was screaming a tone I had helped design and had hoped never to hear. Priority 1. Biological emergency. Live and uncontained. I was moving before my eyes were fully open, and the details scrolled across my vision as I ran. The warship, still stationed near us as escort, had flagged a contamination event in its forward cargo hold. 3 crew members down. Preliminary scans showed trace material matching the precursor pathogen. Not the frozen sample from Lab Theta, which sat sealed and accounted for. Something else. Something that had been on that ship the whole time. The picture assembled itself in pieces over the next frantic minutes, and when it was complete, it was ugly and simple. Before the sample ever reached our station, before the cracked cylinder, and the burn countdown and the bubble, the material had been ferried across space, in a transport container aboard the Lance. The container had been certified clean afterward, by standard Concord methods, methods designed by a civilization that had never met an enemy this patient. A residue thinner than a shadow had survived in a seam of the container's lining, dormant in the cold of the hold, waiting. 22 days it waited, until a maintenance crew opened that hold, brought in heat and light and living bodies, and gave it exactly what it had been built, ages ago, to seek. Krellin's face appeared on my screen while I was still pulling on my gear, and for the first time since I had known the High Warden, the slate eyes showed something underneath the stillness. 3 of my crew, Krellin said. The hold is sealed. My ship's protocol is already speaking to me, medic. It is telling me to vent that hold to space with my people inside it, and every regulation I have served for 60 years agrees. I am contacting you because you once told me there was a third outcome. I am formally requesting it. I told Krellin to hold the seal, vent nothing, and give me 30 minutes. Then I did the thing we had built the response to do. I called Tessic, and we went to work. The docking run took 11 minutes. I spent them in the shuttle with Tessic beside me, both of us in the new gear, running the checklist we had drilled 20 times and never used once in anger. The counter-agent rode between us in a cold case, 40 doses of pale gold serum grown from my own blood, tested against the frozen sample 100 ways, but never yet asked to save a life. Tessic's claws were steady on the diagnostic kit. I want that recorded too. The researcher who once fainted around blood ran his checks that night with hands like stone, and when I glanced at him, he said, without looking up, "Do not make it a moment, Daniel. I am busy. So I will make it a moment here instead." He was magnificent. The lance of Accord from the inside was all dark corridors and hard edges, and its crew lined our path to the forward hold, pressed back against the walls, watching us pass with those vertical eyes. Dren do not speak much, but as we walked, one of them, then another, then all of them, raised a closed fist to the center of the chest. I asked Tessic quietly what it meant. He said it is what Dren soldiers do when someone walks toward the thing they are walking away from. At the hold door, Krellin was waiting in person, and beside the High Warden stood the ship's chief physician, an elderly Dren whose entire medical arsenal, for an event like this, consisted of scanners, seals, and the venting control. The physician looked at our cold case and our treatment rigs and said, with a kind of hollow wonder, "I have served on this ship for 40 years, and I have never once treated a patient. I have only ever certified them clean or lost. Show me the third thing." We went in through the emergency lock, Tessic and I, alone. The hold was a cavern of shadows and cargo lattice, and the 3 crew members were where their mates had dragged them before the seal dropped, laid out on thermal sheets near the inner wall. 2 were unconscious. The third, the youngest, a junior officer whose name I learned was Sub-Lieutenant Varen, was awake, and that was somehow worse, because Dren stay quiet even in agony, and the only sign of the fire eating through her was the tremor in her jaw and the gray threads already visible under the skin of both her arms. She had been the one who opened the container seam. She had taken the heaviest exposure. She watched us cross the hold toward her, and she said, in a voice like sand, "You are the human who held it in his hand." I knelt beside her and told her yes, and she said, "They told us nothing survives it." I said, "They used to tell me that too." Then I opened the cold case. Here is where 22 days of building mattered more than any moment of courage ever could. We did not improvise that night. We executed. Tessic ran the scans and called the numbers, exposure levels, spread rates, the pathogen's position in each body, mapping 3 separate battlefields in under 4 minutes. The serum could not simply be poured in. Dosing had to match body mass and exposure, timed against the pathogen's activity cycles, supported by fluid lines and thermal control, because Dren bodies had never once in their history run a fever, and we were about to teach them how to survive one. I placed the lines. Tessic managed the rigs. We moved from patient to patient in a rotation we had drilled on mannequins, and the drills held, and I remember thinking, mid-dose, that somewhere Henry Cole was nodding, because he always said that courage gets you through a door and training gets you back out of it. The serum met the pathogen inside Sub-Lieutenant Varen's bloodstream 9 minutes after we entered the hold, and the deep scanner showed us the same unraveling I had watched in the test chamber, the dark material coming apart against defenders it had no answer for. But a battlefield is not a test chamber, and her body, brilliant and ancient and utterly inexperienced, did not know what to do with a war being won inside it. Her temperature rose, the first fever in the recorded history of her species, and her heart stuttered against the strangeness of it, and for 1 long hour, Tessic and I fought to hold her system steady while her blood did work no Dren blood had ever done. 40 minutes into that hour, the mission nearly came apart. Tessic was running the serum consumption numbers on a rolling count, and I heard his voice change in the middle of a report, just 1 degree of tightness, which from Tessic is a siren. Varen's exposure had been heavier than the scans first showed. The pathogen load in her body was burning through her dose faster than the models allowed, and the projection on his screen was brutal in its simplicity. Her serum would run dry 20 minutes before the unraveling finished. The enemy inside her would survive the barrage, battered but breathing, and everything we knew about this thing said that what survives, learns. A second full dose was the obvious answer and the wrong one. Her untrained system was already at its limit, carrying 1 storm. A second dose on top of the first would win the war and stop her hearts doing it. What she needed was not more ammunition. She needed reinforcements, steady and slow, defenders arriving alongside support instead of another artillery strike. And there was exactly 1 place on that ship where reinforcements like that existed, already trained, already victorious once, circulating quietly through the veins of the medic kneeling at her side. The cross-species transfusion rig had been built during our 22 days of preparation, tested on synthetic blood, certified by 3 review boards, and never once used on living patients. I pulled it from the second case and started assembling it, and Tessic looked at the rig, then at me, and did not waste a single second arguing, which is how I knew the math was as bad as I thought. He called the protocol steps while I placed my own line, left arm, the arm without the scar, and we ran the filtered bridge from my blood to hers, my defenders crossing over in a thin, steady stream, buffered and screened, arriving in her battlefield, not as a flood, but as a supply line. I stayed on my knees beside her stretcher for the rest of it, tethered to my patient by a tube the width of a straw, feeling the faint cold pull at my arm, keeping my breathing slow, because my calm was now, in the most literal sense my profession has ever managed, being pumped directly into somebody else. Krellin watched the whole thing through the hold window, and the ship's log records that when the physician beside the High Warden asked what the human was doing, Krellin answered without turning, in a voice the microphone barely caught. "He is paying the debt forward. Be silent and learn." The supply line held. Her count stabilized, then climbed, and the unraveling resumed and did not stop again. I talked to her through it, because she stayed awake, stubborn as any human, and asking questions. She wanted to know what the heat was. I told her the truth. "The heat is your body fighting for you," I said. "It has never been asked before. It has been waiting your whole life to be asked." At the second hour, her readings leveled. At the third hour, the gray threads in her arms stopped advancing. At the fourth hour, they began to fade, and her jaw stopped trembling, and Sub-Lieutenant Varen of the Lance of Accord became the first Concord citizen ever to fight an infection and win. Her 2 crewmates, lighter exposures both, crossed the same line within the day. We stayed aboard the Lance for 3 days, monitoring, adjusting, teaching. On the second day, the ship's elderly physician asked, formally, to be trained in what we did, and then knelt to examine a fluid line like a student. 40 years of seniority folded away without a flicker. On the third day, the residue in the container seam was found, neutralized with a wash built from the serum, and the hold certified clean by methods that now included a human medic crawling along every seam with a scanner, because trust is good and checking is better. And when we finally walked back to our shuttle, the corridor was lined again, the whole crew this time, hundreds of Dren, every closed fist raised to every chest, and at the airlock stood High Warden Krellin, who looked at me for a long moment with those slate eyes, and then raised a fist like the rest, and said, "I have prepared my argument about our first conversation. I intend to lose it slowly, over many years." Varen returned to duty within the month. She wears her faded gray lines uncovered, the way I wear my scar, and I am told that on her ship they are considered a decoration senior to any medal. Everything after that happened the way an avalanche happens, one stone, then all of them. The serum went to full production on 9 worlds. The doctrine went further. Concord Medical Academies, which had taught 3 walls for 100,000 years, avoid, seal, burn, added a 4th word to the oldest chart in their civilization, treat. They built it as a whole new discipline, and they needed teachers, so human medics began arriving by the hundreds, ordinary men and women with steady hands and terrible jokes, standing in front of lecture halls full of beings older than our pyramids, teaching them how to sit with a patient through a fever. The Panvax series, once condemned as reckless self-experimentation, was studied, adapted, and offered across the Concord as the foundation of the first inoculation programs in galactic history. They named the whole framework the Brooks Protocol, over my loud objections. I wanted it named for Tessic, who solved the deadline, or for the 41 seconds, or for nobody. I was outvoted by 11 governments and 1 smug Osui. The response grew from 1 team to 60 in a single year, mixed crews on every one, human medics, Concord scientists, and a growing number of Concord volunteers who asked to train hands-on, which their grandparents would have called madness. Tessic leads the training program now. The researcher who once could not look at an open wound stands in front of each new class, tells them the story of an airlock and a stool, and finishes with the line that has become the unofficial motto of the entire Corps: "Nobody fights alone." It sounds better in his language, where it rhymes. We have answered 14 alarms as of this recording. Dormant spores on a survey moon, a frozen horror in a comet core, a precursor vault that a mining consortium cracked open despite every warning marker, because some behaviors are apparently universal. 14 alarms and not 1 sterilization burn. That number, 0 burns, is the number I am proudest of, more than any of the rest of it. Somewhere in the old archives there is a machine that once calculated that 213 lives were an acceptable price, and every time we bring a team home, I like to think that machine revises its arithmetic. Which brings me to the last piece of this story, the piece that made me finally sit down and record the whole thing. Last month, a courtesy transmission arrived at my office on the Veil of Serenity, forwarded by the Concord Health Directorate with the compliments of Counselor Silic. It was the updated edition of the Galactic Hazard Registry, the master document, the great chart of everything dangerous in the known universe, the one with Class 9 written at the bottom. There were 2 changes in it that concerned me. The first change was this: the precursor pathogen, the oil-dark material from a dead world, the thing that ended its makers and reached for my station's air vents and stopped my heart for 41 seconds, has been formally downgraded. It is now listed as Class 6. Hazardous, contained, and countered. Beside its entry, in the column reserved for approved countermeasures, the registry lists a serum, a doctrine, and a species. The second change was a new entry, added to the registry's final page by unanimous vote of the Directorate. 1 new organism has been elevated to Class 9, the extinction category, the top of the chart, the first confirmed entry in that classification in the history of the Concord. The species designation reads Homo sapiens, native to the world Earth. And in the column where the registry explains each threat, where scholars once wrote about spread rates and lethality, the directorate wrote a single line of rationale, and I am reliably informed that Counselor Sillick authored it personally and vetoed all attempts to make it sound more scientific. It reads, survives everything, and then comes looking for whatever made it. I sat in my office and read that line about 30 times. Then I did the only reasonable thing a man can do when the most advanced civilization in the galaxy officially declares him extinction grade. I printed the page, put it in a frame, and hung it on the medbay wall, right above the old hand-painted sign that Tessick gave me on the anniversary of the breach, the one that says, in slightly crooked human letters, "The doctor is in." People ask me, at ceremonies and in classrooms and once, memorably, in the middle of an alarm, whether I was really calm that day in Lab Theta, whether the smile was real, whether I truly believed the words when I held up my hand and said them. And for years I gave the official answer, the legend's answer. But this is my story, told straight, so here at the end I will give you the true one. I was terrified. My hands shook on the ladder. The vaccine was a 61% hope wearing a confident voice, and I knew it when I said it. I was afraid the whole way down, the whole way in, and most of the 9 days after. But fear, as an old man on Earth taught me a long time ago, is just information. And the information never once said stop. It only ever said, be careful, be quick, and get everyone home. So if you are out there somewhere on a dark deck, listening to an alarm and doing arithmetic, let me leave you with the whole secret of my species, free of charge. It is not that humans are not afraid. We are afraid all the time. It is that a long time ago, on a loud and difficult and wonderful world, we decided that fear was never going to be a reason to stop. It was only ever going to be a reason to bring crackers. The doctor is in. He intends to stay that way.